and welcome to Motorcycle Experience, the podcast. I'm Dave Hatch, your host, along with my co-hosts, as always, Colin Fraser, dialing it in from Toronto, Ontario, and Cameron McFadyen, calling us in from Belleville, Ontario. I'm your host, Dave Hatch, as I mentioned earlier, and welcome to the podcast. How you doing, guys?
Great. Colin, how you doing?
We're keeping up in our pre-Christmas bubble.
Yeah. Excellent. Oh, yeah, you're in the red zone.
Well, No, I'm in the gray zone.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're worse than red, if there is such a thing.
How is it possible that gray is worse than red?
I was joking with the staff. Now we're going to wave the gray flag to stop the races.
Excellent. Well, thanks for taking the time to join us today. On our first premier Motorcycle Experience podcast, we were talking about our first motorcycle experiences, and it sort of led to some interesting discussions and conversations, and we were chatting even afterwards about it just continued on after we were stopped recording. So I thought we would continue that theme today by talking about what it was about motorcycling that attracted us, besides just the sound and the smell and the visual impact of a motorcycle. What was the experience that really sort of stuck with you and compelled you to move on into the sport? The reason I bring this up, we were just chatting about this, on the last podcast, I mentioned gomotorcycling.ca, and it's a great resource for anyone who's thinking about getting into the sport. And trust me, they're not paying us to say this. It's just a great site here in Canada that you can check out. But they had done a survey of motorcyclists and had asked them what was it about the sport that made them want to get into riding a motorcycle. And they talked about freedom, fun, friends, fashion, and fuel efficiency. I still laugh at the fuel efficiency one, but freedom, leave all your stresses behind. Fun, it's a fantastic experience to ride a motorcycle. Friends, it's very social. Fashion, it's cool to ride. And then fuel efficiency. Anyway, it's a nice thing to think about. Colin, where do you sit on that list? Why do you ride?
I think a little bit of all of it. I was curious about motorcycles from a young age, and it just looked like fun. My father was enthusiastic about most motorsport type things, and I think in a way, I really enjoyed my bicycle, so it's in a way an extension of that bicycle. And just every time I learned something or saw something, it just made another step. There was no eureka moment for me. It just steadily grew till I was, sort of very early teens, and was quite interested in reading the magazines and doing all that kind of stuff. I went to a scrambles, they called it back then, in 1971 in Copetown, which was a big place for motocross in Canada. And that was a big event in the fall when the Europeans came over, and that had a big effect on me, and certainly seeing a movie on any Sunday. And because of a fuel crisis issue in the UK, I was supposed to go with my extended family to see the Le Mans 24-hour car race, and instead I went to see the Isle of Man TT. And all of those things definitely led me to my motorcycle addiction.
That's crazy. Those races are crazy on the Isle of Man.
Yeah, I got to see Giacomo Agostini race an MV Agusta at the Isle of Man. How many people can say that?
Oh, man, that must have been wild. And the sound,
it was loud.
The sound of that MV. Oh, man. Nice.
No, it was really, really fun and very memorable, to have that in my early motorcycling days. And it was fun too to see all the British guys with their Triumphs and their Nortons, and particularly at the time I was impressed by the German people who were, had much more sophisticated equipment and gear, and were much more set up to travel distances on motorcycles, and I was exposed to them when I was at the Isle of Man. So it was fun to start to see the various components of motorcycle culture that would become predominant as the 60s and 70s progressed.
How could you not get hooked to go to something like that?
Yeah.
How old were you, Colin, when you went there?
So I would have been 12, which I think is just about perfect for developing some wacky addiction. And I still was into hockey in particular, like most of my friends and people my age. But definitely from there on, it pushed me towards the fellow motorsports type people. And definitely started thinking about what it was going to take to get a motorcycle. And back then, they weren't particularly expensive, and there wasn't that wide a range of choices the way there is now. So there wasn't as much of a strata, if you will. There were only a few different kinds of bikes and only a couple of different classes, and there wasn't much in the way of gear and whatnot. So it was, in some ways, kind of more accessible.
Mm-hmm. So you're definitely going to check off the fun. It's a fantastic experience to ride a motorcycle and friends. It's a very social and welcoming environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely got a kick out of the gear. And it was funny when you mentioned the style and whatnot. I was thinking about, all those German guys with their girlfriends on the BMWs when I went to the Isle of Man, because they really stood out being so much more prepared and able to deal with the weather and have more fun because they weren't so hindered by bad weather, which, of course, when you ride in the UK is a constant.
Right. And fashion back then, I can just picture those full one-piece leather suits and the lace-up black boots up to their knees.
A lot of Belstaff stuff.
Yeah, they're really great stuff. Cam, what about you? When we look at that list, what was it for you?
I don't know. It's kind of off the board a little bit for me because, we talked about how I had that sort of semi-traumatic experience when I was a kid getting burnt by a motorcycle. But I wanted to get into motorcycling because I wanted to learn more about motorcycles because I was editing and shooting a show. That was really the goal of me getting into it. But once I did get my license and go out on some bikes, that's, it's I talked about freedom, but really it's the clarity. Your head is clear. If you're having a bad day or if you're stuck on a problem at work, you can always go on a bike. And it was instantly for me just having moments of clarity and really figuring things out. That's really what hooked me on motorcycling.
So for you, it's the freedom, leave all your stresses and distractions behind.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, there's no question that motorcycling is an incredible sport for relaxation and meditation. There's no question about it. For me, I look down that list and we were talking about our first motorcycle experiences on the last podcast. For me, it was all about being cool. And I'm not afraid to admit that,
That's part of it. It really is.
It really, when I looked at guys back growing up in the suburbs of Toronto and Scarborough out there in the east side, we had a lot of bike gangs nearby. I'm thinking of, the Satan's Choice based in Oshawa and the Vagabonds down in down in West Hill. And, these guys would come riding by, they just looked so cool and they looked like they were enjoying freedom to the max. And I just kept thinking as a kid, I remember being at about 7 or 8 years old. I was at a Cub camp in my Cub uniform, and we were out in the Rouge Valley, and the local chapter, I guess, of the Satan's Choice were on a run one Saturday morning. They must have been going up to Port Perry, up to their clubhouse or something. But I remember crawling out of a tent. I have this strong visual of crawling out of the tent because I could hear this rumbling coming down the highway, and then sort of rubbing my eyes and standing up and looking out as they went past in pairs, and just endless line of motorcycles, and going, that just has to be so cool. And that feeling never left me, and from that moment on I was like, I have to get one of these things.
Well, and you talked about looking cool, and to me still that's kind of a thing, being a motorcyclist now for 8 years. I'm excited when I get new gear. You gave me a new jacket just a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh man, this thing is awesome. But when I was at the motorcycle show probably 2 years ago now, I saw these motorcycle boots that I just fell in love with, and when I go and strap them on and get ready to go, I feel like I'm a superhero getting on my motorcycle. So I totally understand that.
Right. Don't talk to me about gear. Talk to Colin about gear. If anybody is a gear hound, it's Colin. I've been on trips with Colin, and I remember those Nankai gloves we got in Japan. Like, Colin spent hours just looking at the seams and the stitching in those gloves.
Yeah, there was a time when I had a near pornographic obsession with Japanese riding gear, and it was hard to get, and it was hard to get in the size that worked for North Americans. But in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, the boom of what was going on in Japan, and Dave and I were over there at the very, very height of it, and just the opportunity to go motorcycle gear shopping in Japan in various places, but particularly in Tokyo, was remarkable, and definitely checks off some crazy bucket list stuff. And it's not riding, but it definitely had an awful lot to do with motorcycle culture and being, at the time, the most hardcore sport bike enthusiasts in the world were in Japan, and it was really fun to be around all of that.
What were you guys doing in Japan?
Oh, there's a story. 1991, I think, was the year. Colin and I got invited to go to Japan to attend a World Grand Prix race, a World GP at Suzuka Circuit in Japan, and we were the guests of Rothman's cigarettes, the backers of the Rothman's Honda GP team. And Colin, how do you even begin to recap that trip?
Well, I think it's funny because it's a throwback to a different time, when tobacco was absolutely the big thing in terms of motorsports, and they were spending freely and really wanted the attention of the media. And I guess Dave and I were amongst the Canadians they felt could be influential for them. And it was an unbelievable opportunity. You can't imagine anything like that happening anymore. And it was almost crazy, to the point that you could ask for nearly anything. Now, what was strange about our group is Dave and I think, were the only real motorcyclists of our group of people who were on this Rothman's junket. And the things we were asking for were motorcycle things, so they were thrilled to provide them. So we got to see the Honda Museum back when it was supposed to be a secret, and it was under a bowling alley. And, it was always, what can we do for you? What do you want? And it was first class all the way. But one of the things I asked for was an interview with Kenny Roberts, which made no sense whatsoever because he was sponsored by Marlboro, not Rothmans. But nonetheless, they delivered on the interview with Kenny Roberts, which I might have been able to come up with on my own, but it was kind of funny that they could even do that. But it was, it's a ridiculously luxuriant experience in every way it could be.
Yeah, we were so looked after, and right down to having like this massive touring bus, like a 48-seat touring bus in Japan, where the roads are very small and narrow. Having our own translator, and there's Colin and I on this bus. Just Colin and I with our translator, and it was like, where do you want to go? and yeah, Colin, geez, I still remember that breakfast with Kenny Roberts sitting outside. It was a sunny day at the track in the paddock, and you sat down with your tape recorder and you got to interview one of your big heroes, and it was just a joy to watch you do that. But for me, oh my goodness, we had access to all the GP champs of that day, that era. So I'm talking about meeting, my hero, Kevin Schwantz, but then there was Wayne Gardner, Mick Doohan, Eddie Lawson, Roberts, Schwantz, Wayne Rainey. They were all there. And that was what an incredible race. Like, we were, in the infield of 10 feet from the track watching this race, and you could have thrown a blanket over all 7 of those racers for the entire race.
So you were...
Oh, and Dave drowned his video crew.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I had to think about that for a second. Yes, and they supplied us with a television production crew from Tokyo that came up on the train to be with us to shoot all these interviews and to shoot our features. And one of our features was to just hang out at Suzuka, which has like an amusement park in the middle of the track.
What? An amusement? Like a
roller
like
coaster? Ferris wheels. Wow. Yeah. And but the day we did that on our schedule, it poured with rain, and I mean poured like tropical, and monsoon. And Colin's like, Dave, we can't shoot. And I'm like, Colin, we've come all this way, we have to shoot. So we dragged these 2 poor guys. Colin is correct, we drowned them, but they never complained, and we did buy them hot cans of coffee from a vending machine.
Oh, that's something.
Yeah, they had rain gear, but they didn't have rain gear for that day. And it was cold and it was rainy, and yeah, we were pretty much completely everybody soaked.
An umbrella only does so much.
Yeah. And so anyway, it was on that trip that I discovered that Colin truly had a fetish for Japanese riding gear.
Right.
Because one of the things he asked for was, hey, could we go to the Nankai Leather factory and meet the president of Nankai Leathers and get a tour of their gear and their showroom, and we did.
We had tea with the president of Nankai, and we were there the day after the race, which was fun because some of the stars were there dropping off their suits because they like to display suits that had been raced in, with some scrapes and whatnot. And if you had a terrible crash, you were supposed to present the damaged suit as an act of honor. So Dave and I just happened to be at the shop, and I'd say the shop, it was a 7-story building, when there was a parade of all kinds of famous people going through.
Yeah.
What made you think to go to a leather shop? I mean, that's
did you miss the part where I said fetish?
That's such an odd request to me. We're in Japan, and you want to go to a leather factory.
Yeah, well, racing leather,
right? Yeah, of course. But still, I mean, that's kind of
I've been to the Kushtani factory too, right? So it's
You are obsessed, Colin. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess fashion does check the box for Colin Fraser.
Totally.
Yeah. All joking aside, I mean, there is something about putting on your riding uniform, no matter what kind of motorcycle you ride, whether it's a cruiser and you put on your cruiser uniform or your adventure rider and your adventure uniform. There is a certain element of assuming a fashion personality that can't be denied.
Which really brings up the point when you see, I don't want to call them this, but really they're idiots, are in their shorts and T-shirts and flip-flops. I've seen guys out riding sport bikes, super bikes, and they have flip-flops on and shorts on.
Yeah, I just watched a video last night of a guy being arrested in England who was riding, he was tracked at doing 180 miles per hour on his sport bike. And when they arrested him, he was wearing shorts and flip-flops.
Oh, my goodness. What possesses people to do that? I don't get that.
Oh, the flip side is, a direction, if you will, in the sport called all the gear, all the time.
Yeah.
And the idea is, of course, that you never know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And, statistically, most of your incidents happen in your home. And what I tell people that I'm involved with is wear as much gear as you can put up with, right? Like, I mean, everybody sort of has a limit that, this piece is too constructed or this is too uncomfortable. But I think you should do your best to, at least cover up all the bare patches of skin at the absolute minimum.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, just wearing flip-flops, like there's no traction. Like, forget about the protection, but there's no traction. Like putting your foot down, and I've done it with my motorcycle boots, and my foot has slipped on rock or an oil patch or anything like that, and I've been able to catch myself. I can't imagine wearing flip-flops and then slipping. You just fall. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. David, you're a big proponent on the show of wearing proper gear all the time.
All the time. And because I'm fully aware, as Colin said, most accidents will happen generally speaking, statistically speaking, most accidents happen close to home. I think they can happen just as simply, rolling the bike out of the garage and backing down your driveway. Something can happen at a very slow speed. And road rash, the first thing that happens when you put your knee down or your hand down or your shoulder or your elbow, road rash is just so easy to do. It makes no sense to me. There's all this wonderful gear and
it looks cool.
Colin's advice is great. Wear as much as you can. But yeah, the flip-flop thing, I don't get that at all. I don't even like to wear flip-flops when I'm not riding a motorcycle, let alone getting on a motorcycle. Colin, any last thoughts about fashion? I mean, we started talking about freedom, fun, friends, fashion, fuel efficiency, and you said it was all for you, fun and social, but it sounds to me like fashion actually was hiding in the background there.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think that everybody has their own reasons. And I think sometimes how literal the reason isn't important. If convincing yourself that the fuel efficiency is the key to making the decision, I'm always a little... find it tricky to consider fuel efficiency in something you can only use part of the year in a lot of Canada. But having said that, if it convinces you that you deserve to own a motorcycle, then I'm all for whatever theory is required.
Perfect. Okay. I'll go with that. I don't know. For me, it's just too much fun and too much freedom and too much fashion. If the fuel efficiency comes along for the ride, that's great.
Yeah, there's really no wrong answer to this. It's just whatever excites you and gets you into motorcycling. But please, people, wear your gear. God.
Okay, we have a new Mr. Safety Boots over here on the other side of the desk. What inspires you to get into the sport of motorcycling? Is it the freedom, the empowerment, the exhilaration, the belonging? Check out gomotorcycling.ca if you're interested in getting into the sport. They are going to help you get there. And for this week, I'd just like to thank co-host Colin Fraser for getting on the phone with us today, and Cameron McFadyen and myself, Dave Hatch. On behalf of all of us, season's greetings. Hope you have a great holiday season, and thanks for tuning in. Keep your feet on the pegs, your right hand cranked. Bye for now.